You're welcome back. As we move away from security matters, the Senate is expected to approve the $2.2 billion loan request of President Bola Tinubu today, Wednesday. That's 1.77 trillion naira. The request submitted by the president is part of the external borrowing plan outlined for implementation the 28.7 trillion naira 2024 budget. The president's request was presented to the Senate and the House of Representatives through 3 separate letters, where he also urged lawmakers to consider the passage of the Medium-Term Expenditure Framework for 2025 to 2027, the Fiscal Strategy Paper, and amendments to the bill establishing the National Social Investment Program. Now, according to nairametrics, not less than 6 loan projects have been approved, and they include loans for power, $750 million, women empowerment of $500 million, girls' education, $700 million, renewable energy, $750 million, economic stabilization reforms, $1.5 billion, and resource mobilization reforms at $750 million, according to findings by nairametrics. Also, the World Bank may approve 4 loan projects totaling $2 billion for Nigeria this year. If approved, Nigeria will have secured a total of $4.25 billion in loans from the bank this year alone, and a cumulative $6.95 billion under the administration of President Bola Tinubu. And now, to discuss this, we are joined by Dr. Samson Simon, Chief Economist, ARKK Economics and Limited. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. Good to have you here for the afternoon.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, viewers.
Good. Now, let's start by asking, Nigeria is seeking an additional 1.7 trillion naira in external borrowing. So given the country's current economic challenges, what are your concerns about the move?
Well, it's actually a necessity. I won't blame the president or the government for wanting to borrow more, because if you look at the reason for going out to borrow $2.209 billion is to fund the deficit of the 2024 budget. And if you look at the performance of the budget so far, it tends to be underperforming, particularly when it comes to total expenditure. We're doing way below expectation. So there's a need to borrow money. If the money will be used judiciously, if these loans will be directed towards tackling the infrastructural problems that Nigeria has, I think it's not a bad thing. But my fear is that it may end up being used for the current expenditure. It may end up being used to pay back all loans that we borrowed, to service the loans that we have collected before now. That's the sad reality, because when they projected for this year, they ended up using the entire revenue for the current expenditure non-debt and for servicing debts. So that's the great fear. But if the money will be used well and it will be used for infrastructure, then I think there's no reason for one to be afraid of anything. Because when you pay for a capital project, the project should be able to pay for themselves, pay both the principal and the interest. So that's the good thing about it. But I'm afraid that that's not likely going to be the case.
So jumping on your fears now, could it potentially jeopardize the country's long-term fiscal sustainability? Is that what your fears are?
Of course, it would jeopardize Nigeria's long-term fiscal sustainability. Already talking about in 18 months, this current government has borrowed equivalent of 50 trillion, inherited 87. So it's not really good. The fiscal space is already limited. If you look at our debt servicing, is almost consuming the entire revenue. So we're just creating problems for ourselves, and it's likely going to get worse with debt servicing. The ideal debt servicing for a budget should be, as recommended by the World Bank, is 22.5% of your revenue. We're using a third, we're even projecting, like 2025 budget, a third of the projected revenue, a third of the budget is meant for debt servicing. And as we're borrowing some more, it might get, according to projections, is going to even exceed that to around 40% of our revenue over the budget, not even revenue of the budget. So that's not really good. We're getting ourselves into trouble that it might not be easy for us to come out of.
So the money is almost here. Considering past experience, do you think that there are sufficient safeguards being put in place to ensure that, like you said, that these monies don't go into servicing previous debts and perhaps maybe other effects that aren't really supposed to be what they're meant for?
Well, if you ask those people concerned, that's what they claim. That's what they claimed in the past. But the truth is that there's nothing different that we're doing now compared to what we were doing before. So it's the same old story. And it's just so sad that we don't seem to have learned lessons. The current government was bragging about bringing down debt service compared to the last government. Sadly, they are going into the same trap, because even the reduction in the debt service is because we increased the debt stock. It's at the detriment of the debt stock. It ballooned so that we could have lower debt service to revenue ratio. But with the rate at which they are borrowing, they are aggressively borrowing. Anything borrowable, they are ready to borrow. I think that's not really good. We are not helping matters. We're still trading waters. We're still doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And we know what Albert Einstein called that.
What about Nigeria's foreign exchange reserves and also the credit worthiness when it comes to our international standing with lenders and financial institutions?
For our foreign exchange reserves, we seem to be doing one thing that is undeniable is that the current government has done very well when it comes to building up our reserves, when it comes to shoring up our reserves. But that has not really translated to anything better for the Nigerian people. Mind you, the government is what we have people. So if you have bigger reserves, and that is not translating, but naira, right, living standards, is basically tomorrow. So there's a problem with that. I know it's a good thing. I'm not discrediting the fact that they have done well building of our reserves. It's a good thing. But we need it to be translated to real things for the average Nigerian. Then in terms of our credit worthiness, we're not doing really good when it comes to credit ratings. Check anywhere, whether it's Fitch or Standard & Poor's or any other credit rating agency. I'm not doing really good. We are basically at junk status, and that's why we have to go extra mile and be willing to give as much interest as possible for people to really buy our bonds. So it's not really good, and we're really compounding our problems by giving interest rates that by giving interest rates that we know we will struggle to pay back. And that's what is affecting our debt services.
Well, Dr. Samson, I want to say thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you indeed.
Thank you for having me.